pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. I really wanted to go outside today, but the weather's not cooperating. I thought it was just gray, but I went out and the floor, not the floor, the ground was wet. I thought, oh, maybe it's just, still be okay, but took a few steps. It was just spitting a bit rain, and I wasn't, with all the books I'm lugging or was planning to lug down to the park, I wasn't going to chance it. So, it's an indoor Friday Reads, people. I've had a pretty interesting week. I'm not sure if it was good or bad. Lots of good and some bad. So, The Empress of Bailing is back. I have bailed on 3 books since you last heard from me. One was about 2 or 3 hours after you last heard from me, and that was this Australian novel, Flames by Robbie Arnott. I got stuck on the chapter called Iron, which was all about the Esk god. I believe we met him at the end of the preceding chapter, and he was a river spirit in human form. And I got about 6 pages into that, and I just hated it so much. I don't want to read a novel that has a god in it. Now, I'm aware that there are always exceptions. For example, Akwaeke Emeze's Freshwater, which I absolutely loved. So, some books with weird stories about gods or whatever hit you right and some don't, and this one just made me sick, so I bailed immediately, and glad I did. My buddy readers carried on without me and had a good time. Apparently I haven't had a chance to catch up with all of their sharings on Voxer, but I will do so because I'm going to be a guest on Anna Bailey Karras' podcast, Books on the Go, and that interview is going to be taped in a couple hours. Obviously, I'm not going to be talking about this book very much, but I am going to talk about why bailing is the best thing about reading. Stay tuned! I also bailed on this novel from Singapore, State of Emergency by Jeremy Tiang. It was boring. The characters didn't come to life for me at all. The story was not boring. It was quite interesting. The earliest part of the story was in the 1960s when there was a lot of political ferment in Malaysia and Singapore, and I couldn't follow all that, but I was quite happy to Google my way into understanding it. But the characters just didn't come to life, so I read a fifth of it and I was done. And I read 10 pages of this mystery. Actually, it's not a mystery. It's by P.D. James, part of the Faber Stories series, The Victim. From what I could gather, this is not a mystery, but this is a revenge story. And I hate mysteries. I've never read any P.D. James, and I don't think I ever will. The writing was fine, but it's about a man who's plotting to murder his wife's second husband because he stole her from him. That is just the most boring plot for a story that I could possibly imagine. No. It reminded me of one of my most hated writers based on one book only, but you sure ain't gonna see me trying another one by this writer, Patricia Highsmith. What the hell was that one they did for the readers? I can't remember. It was such a horrific reading experience. I hated everything about that book. Those kind of stories just make me sick, and this was gonna be one, so I bailed very early. What was that Patricia Highsmith novel? I'll put it up here. Traumatic memory. So those were my bails. I'm making a comeback, people. I finished 3 books. 2 of them were not so great. One of them was absolutely outstanding. Why don't I start with the outstanding one? Jhumpa Lahiri's debut collection of short stories, Interpreter of Maladies, is the best short story collection I have read since Adam Johnson's Fortune Smiles. My first by Jhumpa Lahiri. I would say there were 9 stories, 6 or 7 of them were 5 stars. The others were like 4, or maybe 1 was 3, but that was averaged out to a 5-star read. I thought they just had a lightness of touch. I loved the humor, and the characters were fully drawn, and most of the stories themselves were formally interesting. This was a buddy read with Lukash of Totally Pretentious, and I think he would mostly agree with my assessment. he certainly ended up enjoying it by the end, and I was pretty hooked by the beginning. I got a comment last night from Troy. What is his channel name? I think his name is Troy. His channel name is Troy Towel. I love his channel, even though he reads a lot of mysteries. And he asked me what makes a story great. And I replied immediately saying, what a great and very difficult, intimidating question. I don't really know how to talk about short stories. I'm going to be talking about another collection of short stories later in this video. The stories are about mostly Indo-Americans, Americans of Indian descent or themselves Indian immigrants to America, primarily or maybe exclusively from the Bengal region of India. And there was a lot of intercultural stuff going on that was really interesting for the most part, and just some really quirky characters that I will never forget. There was a 103-year-old landlady and her white, and her relationship with this young Indian man boarding with her, and quite a few others that just really quite striking. And so now let me just move on to this collection that I also finished and that I was reading basically alongside the Lahiri collection, Foreign Soil by Maxine Beneba Clark. And I didn't like these, almost not at all. So in terms of wrestling with Troy's question, what makes a good short story? I mean, these weren't good for the most part because they were just stories. They weren't short stories. There's a narrative alchemy that happens to transform an anecdote into a good short story, and that didn't happen here almost at all. Some very interesting anecdotes, but nothing that the characters were flat, almost to a character, not memorable, not alive for me as I was reading, but some very interesting anecdotes about non-white people, black people, basically, living all over the world. So I know this is a booktube darling, but there was no spark for me. I mean, I finished it, so there was a couple stories that were rendered so heavily in diction that I scanned them. I almost would be lying to say that I read them, but the diction, I mean, I love the diction in Zora Neale Hurston's writing. I have no trouble with that, but this was a different intensity of diction, and I just couldn't. It gave me a headache to try to read those. There was a couple like that. But no, I was not impressed. 3 stars. Because 3 stars is not a good book, people. Think about it. 3 stars equals 60%. 60% is not a good score. I'm being very controversial this morning. And I also read this from the Women's Prize long list, Bottled Goods by Sophie Van Leeuwen, and I didn't like it. 2 stars. I really didn't like it by the end. This is apparently flash fiction. She writes fiction on Twitter or something. Yeah, okay. So that's what flash fiction is. No. She's got a bunch of micro-narratives, and it just comes off as lazy, slapdash, and uninteresting. But let me say a few positive things, because I did keep reading. I didn't bail. There was an energy to the story. I was interested to see what would happen. There's some references to Romanian culture in here that intrigued me. And there was one character, maybe only one, that I was interested in, and that was her aunt, who was married to somebody high up in the Romanian bureaucracy or whatever, and so she could enjoy her religious rituals and be kind of protected against any political persecution because of her husband. And she was a very interesting character, and I thought well drawn. But the central characters, and I'm not plagiarizing from what I heard Eric and Anna talk about on their wonderful video last night, because I had exactly the same reaction. The main characters, why were they together? And their relationship was not coherent. I mean, it was on the rocks, and then for no particular reason, they became so intimate and lovey-dovey, and that was just annoying. And there's the magical realism in here was episodic, and absolutely, it was like, what do you say? Deus e machina? I don't know how to end this novel, so let's inject the stupidest fairy tale cliche to make make it end somehow. No, that the ending was awful. This had no business being on a prize list, and it's too bad because I love these editions, but this was really awful. So, one gem, Interpreter of Maladies, and two duds to varying degrees. As usual, what's most exciting about my Friday reads are the ones that I have started. I've started 3. When I bailed on the Robbie Arnott book, I wanted to make sure to replace it with an Australian novel, so I picked up a book that I have mentioned a couple times wanting to get to, and so I have gotten to it, The Gulf by Anna Spargo Ryan, and I'm not that far into it, just over 30 pages, but I really enjoyed her debut called The Paper House, and I'm so far really enjoying this. There's an emotional resonance to her prose that I really connect with. I remember finding The Paper House to be not a perfect novel, but a really satisfying, well-written novel that had moments of brilliance, and so I'm expecting this one to be maybe even better. And look, it matches my blouse. I love this cover. I think it might be my favorite cover of the year. Don't know what else to say about it because I'm just getting a start on it, but glad I made the big switcheroo for this one. And I did a quick preview of the Indigenous Australian novel that I was planning to read. I won't even mention it by name. I read a chapter and the writing was overwritten. It pulled me in a little bit, but it didn't pull me in enough. And I just decided I wasn't going to try it. So instead I found a non-fiction title written by an Indigenous Australian writer and lawyer called Finding Eliza, Power and Colonial Storytelling by Larissa Behrendt. And it is about an aspect of Australian history that I knew absolutely nothing about. A British woman who, with her husband and the other people on the ship, they were shipwrecked off I think it was the east coast, I'm not sure, near Brisbane. Good Lord, I don't know Canadian geography. Don't ask me anything about Australian. But they were shipwrecked in the 1830s, and then the Indigenous people found them, and there are wildly varying accounts of what happened. But it became a colonial story within Australia that this woman, Eliza, her husband died soon after, but that she was treated very badly, raped or violently assaulted or whatever, turned into a slave by the Indigenous peoples. Apparently there's very little basis for that being true, and this book examines all of that kind of from a historical cultural perspective, and it's quite a breezy read. I'm doing it on Kindle. Wasn't at all sure about it because this kind of thing can get very academic and be a turnoff, but the writing is pretty good and easy to read, so I'm enjoying it. But what I am most exuberant about is I have started and am now about 40 pages into Sarah Moss's Ghost Wall. I started it yesterday and I can't put it down. It's so good so far. Based on the first 40 pages, and I know that there's still 100 pages to go, but based on this, I want this book to win, even over Freshwater. It is so addictive, the story, and the writing is just my kind of writing. The characters are so alive. So it's a weird premise, which is interesting. It's a family and then a professor and his students that are doing an exercise in experimental archaeology, going to some place in England, in Northumberland, and trying to live like they did 1,000 years ago or whatever. So all of that is interesting, and all the things that I'm picking up about how people lived 1,000 years ago. I don't even know what era. The Iron Age, so maybe it's 2,000 years ago, I don't know. That's fascinating, but even more, or what just is laced through that, is just really crisp, alive, vibrant characters. The protagonist seems to be the daughter, and she's maybe a teenager, Sylvie, and her father is an amateur archaeologist. He's a bus driver or something, like but has an amateur fascination with all this stuff, and he's an asshole. And the relationship between them, because she has learned so much about this and is interested in it in spite of herself, but the deeply conflictual relationship with her asshole father that's told in a way that makes me nervous about where the story's going, because it opens with some violence that is not contextualized, but it seems ritualistic, and I don't know who the victim of the violence is going to end up being now that we're into the story, and I'm worried about that. But also, it's typical father-daughter. She's so annoyed with her father, and she's lippy. I love her, and it's done so well. In 40 pages, I'm deeper into this than I get into most novels that are 300 pages. It's just so well done. So I really wanted to finish it and tell you what I thought of the whole thing by today, but that didn't happen. But I am absolutely smitten with Sarah Moss's Ghost Wall. May it continue. Last week at this time I was fairly smitten with this one, so things do change quite suddenly with me, but this one really has captured my imagination, so that's fabulous. So yeah, that's what's been happening. Now, I also have a lot of things that I'm going to be starting on May 1st, on or around May 1st. The last 2 videos I did were TBR videos, one for the Asian Readathon and then one more generally. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I'm going to show you the 7 books I'm planning to start. So let me tell you about I will be starting the Welsh novel from 1936, The Heyday in the Blood by Geraint Goodwin. I'm really excited because I haven't read Welsh literature for so far this year. And Tired Mama Tries to Read, who I shortened her channel name to Tired Mama Reads or something yesterday, but Charlotte of Tired Mama Tries to Read recommended this one to me. Really stoked to try that. And Buddy Read with Sharon of Hooked on Books on Jackie's Transparent City. We're going to get started on this right off the bat on May 1st. I'm pretty sure I'll be starting this early in May as well. Cousin Bette by Balzac, a buddy read with Andrew Beyond the Pages. Britta thinks I'm going to bail, and I'm going to prove her wrong! The next 3 are for the Asian Readathon. That Long Silence by Shashi Deshpande. Collection of short stories from Thailand. Sightseeing by Radhawoot Lapcharoensap. And I have been dying to read this forever, and one of my subscribers said, you've had it for... I think, what did I say on the Asian TBR? I said, I've had this for 3 years and I've been dying to read it ever since. And he said, you know, that made me laugh. And yeah, welcome to my world. I have been, but now I'm finally going to get to it. Tan Tuan Eng's The Garden of Evening Mists. Alice Munro's collection, Too Much Happiness, a buddy read with Kendra Winchester. And I'm going to be talking about Alice forevermore now that I know that it bugs Steve Donahue. This is war, buddy. And one other little story, Cyprian Ekwensi's Glittering City. Cyprian Ekwensi is a Nigerian writer who wrote around the same time as Chinua Achebe. And I first found out about him from Books by Lanus. Is that her channel name? Something like that. Wonderful booktuber. And I picked this up a few days later for like $5 at a bookstore, and I'm going to be buddy reading this with Joe Smith. My first buddy read with Joe Smith and the other group, Anna Bailey Karras and Valentina and so on, didn't go well because I bailed, and so I am going to compensate with Joe by buddy reading this with her. I think this weekend. We haven't quite firmed up the schedule, but I think it's happening very soon, and looking forward to that. It's just a 50-page story, and I'm looking forward to that. So that is what I will have started, all of those, and we'll have things to say about them when I see you next Friday. So the Golden Week holiday, the new emperor will be crowned next on May 1st, something like that. The Reiwa era will be upon us. I'm probably going to vlog during it's a full week holiday, so basically my holiday will start tomorrow, so from Saturday until the following Sunday. So that's a nice long holiday. Usually Golden Week is 4 consecutive national holidays, but they've elongated it for the coronation. I'm going to try the Dora style. I'm going to give you a week-long vlog, very short, compressed of what I'm up to reading-wise, and maybe be able to go somewhere to show you some of something to do with the coronation. I don't know what will be happening with that, so I am so looking forward to having a week off. How about you? what are you doing for the coronation? Thanks for watching.